Hello, I'm Matt Ross, Editorial Director of Global Government Forum, the publishing events and research business serving civil servants around the world. Welcome to our webinar on skills and systems for remote working. We're going to look at how civil servants of all grades, all professions and departments can adapt to working from home. The webinar is run in association with Microlink, a company providing systems and technologies that help people to compensate for any physical or mental problems they have. We're going to look at a number of topics, including how people can adapt to working in the home environment, create the right workspace, adapt your working style to operating in a distributed team, and adopt technologies to help overcome the specific challenges around remote working. We have three speakers today, Dr. Nasser Siabi, who is founder and CEO of Microlink, Dr. Nancy Doyle, who is an occupational psychologist, the CEO of neurodiversity consultancy Genius Within, and a postdoctoral research fellow at Birkbeck, University of London, and Carl Ward, head of assistive technology training and a workplace accessibility assessor at Microlink. Before I hand over, a couple of housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded in part so that we can produce an article for publication on Global Government Forum. We'll distribute that to all of you in due course. We have a captioning service on the webinar. It's produced by a company called Verbit. If you go to the bottom of Zoom window, you'll see something called closed caption there. Simply click on that and the captioning should begin. The system's got two options, an instantaneous caption and one with a 15-second delay, which produces more accurate results. We're using one with a 15-second delay because we intend it really for people who are hard of hearing. So if you feel like using it, I suggest you just switch off the sound and focus on the captioning. Other people may wish just to keep an eye on it because it's remarkably impressive, actually. It's fast. We've set aside 2 periods for Q&A within the webinar, and we have some Q&As in. We'll be keeping an eye on that box. If you have questions for any of the speakers throughout the event, please do simply click on the Q&A box there, type your question in, and we will put them to these speakers during those Q&A sessions. And if you have any further questions after the event, Microlink will be happy to answer them. We'll be in touch, as I say, when we've produced the event, produced the write-up, we'll be in touch with everybody with the write-up, link to all the slides, link to a recording of the event, and contact details for people to get back in touch and ask any further questions they have. We're going to hear first from Dr. Siabi, Microlink's Chief Exec Officer. Nasser needs to unmute himself.
Hi, good morning to the American and the North American friends and the UK colleagues, and good afternoon. But thank you for joining this webinar, and we are really hugely excited with the kind of participation number. They're really quite impressive. It's an important subject. What we have done over 30 years is to help hundreds of thousands of disabled people who have challenges of work to be able to do their work and be equal to their colleagues, their peers, whether it's in education, higher education, or in workplace. And we've done that with basic interventions, which is psychological, physical, and productivity tools. These are non-medical interventions. And we've always done this on the basis that to make an individual to be able to do their job and play on a level playing field. And that has been the cornerstone of our success. And most companies who did this, obviously, they were doing the right thing, they were doing the legal thing, but throughout the past many years, they've discovered it's absolutely a great investment, because the money they've spent to get those people up to the level that they can perform equal to the rest of their colleagues, the money they've spent is paid back 5 times over. We've done a huge case study many years ago which is available if anyone is interested. Why we think this is relevant is because the people with disabilities have always struggled because of a lot of restrictions. Companies, quite understandable. They had IT barriers where they couldn't do what they wanted to do because their software may have not fitted into the standard issue of software the company uses, or they won't be able to sort of have access to the work remotely. We've been able to make that happen for these tens of thousands of these people. And now that the world has changed, it's almost turned upside down. You find that almost everyone has become disabled because your access to the work platforms has been taken away from you. Now you have to work from your home with a restricted access to the equipment, the kind of access to your colleagues, the meeting. So that certainly has a profound impact on everybody's performance, whether it's physical or psychological. We think that these many years of working would certainly help the situation right now for people to start considering this as an opportunity for creating a much more inclusive and a holistic workplace, because this lockdown will end. And when it does, there are a section of the population will still have to be in a locked-in position. These are the people who are over a certain age at risk. So whatever we do now will need to carry on doing it well into the future. And we believe that the practice we've been following for years could apply and certainly will help millions of people and to become even more productive. The work that we have done, as I said, there are three parts of interventions we do, and there are psychological. All the psychological work is non-medical and is delivered by our brilliant panelists, Nancy and her colleagues, who provide work coaches, psychologists who actually help people to find the coping strategies when they're struggling. So her experience is going to be invaluable for today. And then we also have physical equipment that they need for their comfort. Again, when we work from home in a very restricted area, you need that comfort and the safety as well. Hopefully, once this is over, you'll see the benefit of changing the way of working for the better permanently rather than just for now. I'll pass you over to my colleague, Dr. Nancy Doyle. Over to you, Nancy.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Nasser. So I'll just go straight in. So we're going to look at the psychological impact of remote working. And as Nasser says, that is something that we're all having to do right now. But actually, it's something that many people with disabilities need to do in order to participate in the labour market. So the same kind of principles that we're all learning for ourselves right now can actually also apply in organising staff teams so that more people can participate in work. And talking to diversity and inclusion specialists across the world, it isn't just disabilities that could benefit from increased flexibility around remote working, it's also parents. And so we're hoping that this opportunity that we've all had to have insight into remote working will create more inclusion for women in the workplace and for disabled people. So we're looking at well-being and isolation, and we're looking at the cognitive impact of all this remote contact. So just a couple of notes before we start. Well-being and isolation, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So you might be here on this webinar to learn about things you can do for your staff, but I also want you to just take a moment and apply to yourself. It's all very well thinking of other people, and that's something that we tend to do in management and leadership is we think about how to organise our staff, and actually we have to apply the same rules to ourselves. What do you need to work at your best at this time? And also another thing to note is that when there are big sort of drawn out crises or disaster periods, something that we've learned already in psychology is that there is a double peak of anxiety, one at the start and one when we transition back. So be prepared. So thinking about the emotional needs of your staff, what you've just been through in terms of the reorganization, you are going to have to go through again. Only this time, when we have the second peak of anxiety, we're going to be in a position where many people will be grieving, where people have had genuine, life-threatening experiences, and where people are really kind of unsettled. So we need to be thinking about mental health as a safeguarding issue, not just the kind of normal run-of-the-mill day-to-day, or let's talk to each other about how we're feeling. It needs needs to be a little bit more structured, scaffolded and professional than that. So, okay, if we can go on to the next slide. So one of the, Maria, if you could tip onto the next slide for me. There we go, lovely. So the things that we already know about making remote working work brilliantly is about time and space boundaries. So there's lots of research into what we call the always on culture. And the always on culture is where we lose the separation between our work life and our home life. And that kind of has implications for the expectations that we're setting around when we reply to emails, about how available we have to be for our work, and how split our attention is. And that's been shown to have quite a negative impact on people's well-being and anxiety. So right now, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create boundaries and routines. And in general, for home workers, what we need to do is create boundaries and routines. So we can do that with equipment. If we don't have a lot of space, we can at least put away equipment at the end of a day. If we are working from home and we can create a separate space, that's great, but we might not be able to. And many of our employees and colleagues right now are working from home with young children, with other people in the house. I, for example, have a dog who's just started growling. That's not ideal. Sorry about that. I hope she doesn't distract us too much. So, you know, what is going on for people at home? Let's not assume that everyone can do what we can do. Something that really works is structuring the day and creating a company structure for the day. So you can start the day with a 5-minute round robin and end the day with a 5-minute round robin. And people that have been remote working for a while, what they're reporting at the moment is that this is great because now everybody's doing it. And people who were remote working when other colleagues were going into a physical building are now saying things like, well, actually, this is brilliant. You know, now I feel part of the company. I know what's going on. So these are some things that we can do now to make everybody feel included and to create some separation and structure. But actually, ongoing, this might be one of the things that we can keep because it's a very inclusive way to go about things. However, having said that, lots of people aren't able to stick to hours right now. So if you have staff with young children, they might be working very, very unsociable hours. And I think the biggest thing here is about talking about it. So understand that equipment, space, time boundaries, coming up with agreements about if somebody's working late at night, do you have to respond to them late at night? Or if you're working early in the morning, are you allowed to send emails before 9 o'clock? Can we use delayed send? Each team needs to come to an arrangement when you've got remote workers because everybody's remote working situation is different. Great, so can we go on to the next slide? So emotionally and cognitively, remote working is very, very different to being around in person. So the parts of the brain that you're using to process information right now are very different to if we were in a big room, if we were having a meeting, if we were at a conference. You've got less sensory stimulation available to you. So normally you're picking up cues from body language, you're noticing the reactions of your colleagues, you're kind of aware of who's engaged and who's not engaged around you. Whereas in this situation, we're kind of isolated and we've got a very sort of flat, stayed image and you know, one source of noise. And so it's much harder for our brains to engage and extract the kind of meaning that we normally extract out of conversation. So some people find that kind of very, very draining, and lots of us are finding that we used to be quite happy to have 2-hour meetings and now we can really only handle 1-hour meetings, and we need to put in breaks in between meetings. Some people find the cameras really overwhelming. There's evidence to suggest that the way that we do video conferencing, where we stare into a camera and you know, we've got kind of a full-on face interaction. If I do it like this, so you're kind of looking right into my eyes, you know, actually that's a fairly abnormal way of looking at each other, and normally we only do it at times of great passion, when we're about to have a fight. And so it kind of creates a different emotional response for us that we're not used to. And people will be kind of muddling through that right now and kind of trying to work out why they're finding this really inaccessible and why they're not. So the idea really is to keep things as short as possible, to give people flexibility. So if the camera is too much for people, don't insist on people having cameras on. However, lots of people really require some form of visualization. So I would advise not relying on phone meetings for groups more than sort of 3 or 4, because just voice processing and no image whatsoever is even harder. So, you know, having a nice colourful visual slide if you're not going to have video, that sort of thing. And then, you know, in terms of energy, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're looking at lots of evidence right now that suggests that this isn't going to be a kind of, right, we've had a few weeks of shutdown and now we're going back up again. Actually, what we're really doing right now is accelerating what was already happening, which is moving out of our offices and moving much more towards remote access working. And so we need to understand how to pace ourselves in these situations. We're going to be out of offices more, working on our own more, working from multi-locations more, and that's just how the world is going. So thinking about how we can make sure that we create company structures or team structures where events are paced and timed, so that they're not as stressful as the last few weeks have been, and things like the Pomodoro technique. So the other issue with being a remote worker is you don't have your colleagues around you to stimulate you in the same way. So people are finding it hard to concentrate and focus, and the Pomodoro technique is about setting timers so that you deliberately segment the space for focus, and then deliberately segment another space for moving around and actually standing up and stretching and not just sitting down all day. Those things are really, really helpful. Okay, and we move on again. Thank you, Maria. So the other thing that's going on when we don't have all of our full sensory information is we're misunderstanding each other. And we haven't got as much informal contact, and we've got heightened anxiety as a kind of, you know, international baseline right now for most humans. So we're going to be more likely to jump to conclusions, to misinterpret, and I recommend practicing pre-forgiveness. So you talk to each other about the fact that this is likely to happen, and then it's less disconcerting than it does. I have a colleague, she's actually my PA, and she's one of the most efficient people I've ever met in my life. And when this first sort of started, she started sending out lots and lots of emails all the time. And I asked her, I said, Fern, you know, what's going on? She said, well, you know, I need to keep letting people know what I'm doing, because if I'm not like present, then you're all going to assume I'm just sitting around in the bath drinking wine and eating bonbons. And I was very quick to reassure her that nobody was thinking that, and everyone was quite sure that she was working at her best. But that kind of misinterpretation and assumptions that we're doing, that can be quite negative, and it's very easy for things to spiral, particularly when everybody's stressed. So if you have a contract of pre-forgiveness where you're opening the space and saying there are going to be misunderstandings, we are going to tread on each other's toes, we're going to not stay up to date with what each other's doing, this is going to cause problems, let's create some boundaries around that. Distractibility and hyperfocus. So, you know, with all of these things going on, the different cognitive demands of our communication techniques, some people are going to find this really, really helpful. So, there are some colleagues that you have right now who find the office environment quite overwhelming, and they might be going into hyperfocus right now. They might be doing their best work. They might be literally getting into the detail that they've not had time for because they keep getting distracted. But lots of us will be very distractible, and we'll be finding it harder to concentrate. So one tip for that is to look at times of day where people are most productive. You might find you've got people who actually really welcome starting work super early because it's easier for them to focus when it's quiet, or conversely late at night. General distractions, if you've got people who can't acquire the quiet they need, we do always recommend masking background noise. That's a really helpful technique. If you're going to mask background noise with music, it needs to be music that you know well. If it's music that you've never heard before, or just a random kind of playlist on Spotify, then actually the novelty of a new song is going to distract you. But if it's an album that is your favorite album that you used to listen to when you were a teenager and you know it really well, it will just mask the background noise. So bit of a tip there. I'm also finding that the news is very distracting. So I have another colleague who was very, very anxious recently. Both she and her husband have existing conditions that mean they are particularly vulnerable to the virus, and they have young children, and her anxiety levels were going up and up. And I noticed that she was wearing an Apple Watch that was literally pinging every 5 minutes with the headlines coming through, and, you know, just had to sort of take her to one side and go, do you know what, it might be time to turn the Apple Watch off for a little while. Let's just not have that level of distraction. Can we boundary the time? And yes, I understand that you need to be aware of what's going on so that you can take the right decisions for your family, but let's boundary that and not be doing it throughout the day while you're trying to do other things. Another good tip for distractibility is to have a dump pad for intrusive thoughts. So as you're focusing on one bit of work and then you suddenly remember the email you haven't responded to, or the call that you've got to do tomorrow, just, you know, have that space, have a whiteboard next to your desk, or a big A3 piece of paper, whatever you want, to just put those things, and then create time in your diary for picking them up. And these are just a couple of ideas. There will be other ideas out there, and so what I really recommend is having a strategy session with your team, and working through lots of these ideas, because they can share best practice. Okay, if we go on to the next one. So self-care is important right now. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and neither can anybody else. I think people who are doing lockdown with children, I think we'll just need to go, oh, all hail. I have teenage children, and quite frankly, they are so easy by comparison to toddlers. It's just amazing what some families are dealing with. And so self-care, normally we look at kind of things like, exercise, nutrition and hydration, thinking about places we can go or nice leisure activities. And at the moment we can't do that. So we've been recommending things like, take time out to organize photos that you've been meaning to do for a while, or learn an instrument, or do some painting. Make sure that you're boundarying time to do this within your working week. But for some of the people that have got kids around and they're trying to work and manage the kids and the home learning, that's just going to be impossible. So one of the things that I say to people with young children around right now is that actually sometimes self-care is giving yourself permission to not be brilliant. And if you just need to sit around in your pajamas for most of Saturday watching Peppa Pig and eating flapjacks, then that's what you need to do. And don't kind of raise your aspirations at this moment. And what we do recommend for people is that they have circles of support. And I don't want to suggest that everything should be rolling up to line managers. I think supervisors and managers right now are in kind of quite a pressurized situation where, if each individual direct report is using them as the emotional support, as well as kind of the performance and structure of tasks, that's going to be quite overwhelming. So you can set up peer groups within your teams, check-in buddies, 2 or 3 people that keep an eye on each other, and are just there for a bit of a whinge or a bit of a debrief, a bit of a letting off of steam. And that's a much more sustainable way of doing it for this period, and in general, actually. So next slide. So just in summary, I think, in terms of emotions, note that there's going to be increases in anxiety around all comms, and anxiety affects our thinking. We don't think at our best when we're stressed. So if people's performance is dipping, we're just going to have to accept that for a little while and focus on the anxiety. We can acknowledge it. We can have settling moments planned in regularly, coffee morning breaks, once a week, check-in buddy check-ins, and those kinds of things will help us to get through, and they're actually going to bond us together. So some of the organizations that are doing this really well right now are reporting things like, never feeling as close to their colleagues as they have right now. It's like being part of a family at the moment, the support that we're giving each other. So, how we lead and manage through this period can create the loyalty and engagement with work that we might have got distracted by. There are differences in people's ability to plan, prioritize, and consider time boundaries. We're not going to be able to enforce one set of rules for everybody, but what we do need to be able to do is talk about it. So if we make some of the time boundaries explicit, and we create flexibility, and we recognize that some people are going to need more help in this, some people are going to be really good at it, put them together, get them helping each other. And within that as well, we've got differences in sensory perception, differences in social perception, the nuances that we're losing from being face to face and talking to each other, that's going to create the misunderstanding. So remember to practice pre-forgiveness, and remember that we've got differences in sensory and social perception that affect cognitive meetings. So whereas some of us might be extroverts and want to do nothing but have video calls all day, some of us who might be introverts or have autism or have a sight loss or hearing loss, and who find this form of communication quite draining, we actually don't need that much contact, and we might want to step back. So make sure that you provide that sensory flexibility in your meetings, closed captioning, send agendas in advance so that people feel prepared for what's going to happen, and provide as much visual stimulus as you need to, but giving people the choice of whether or not to engage in that if they find it easier or harder.
Thank you very much indeed, Nancy. Thank you. That's great and perfect timing. We're on track. I've got some great questions coming in. I just want to ask one myself first. When people are working remotely, trying to do new things with a whole load of new constraints on how they can operate, it's easy for tensions to arise between people. All the roles have been thrown up in the air and come back down. Nobody's had a way it worked out exactly who's doing what and what we need to be doing. In those circumstances, it's easy for tensions to arise, and we lack the informal ways that people might, overcome those. If you just, meeting over the kettle or just a smile across the office, and we lack those ways of smoothing ruffled feathers. Are there ways, how can people who are feeling a bit aggrieved or bruised get relationships back on track and avoid falling into a sort of vicious circle?
Well, that's why I think we need to practice pre-forgiveness. So we need to acknowledge that's going to happen so that people take it less seriously when it does. We need to, and that's the other point of the check-in buddies, is sometimes you just need to have a whinge, and you need somebody on the other end of the phone to go, yeah, I see what you mean, but you know what? They probably didn't mean it. Let's just, is there anything here that you need to take forward? There are structures for giving and receiving feedback that can be very helpful. One of the training programs that we use at Genius Within, and this is particularly helpful for autistic people who don't always understand social nuances and communication, is to take feedback and to take experience into the concrete and into the examples, away from the misinterpretation. So if we take my example of my PA who thought everybody would think she was lolling about in a bath, not doing any work, her thing was, well, I didn't want you to think that I wasn't engaged and working hard. So we can go into, so what did I see? What did I hear? What did she see or hear? What let her know that I might be thinking that? Was there anything I said? Did I send her an email chasing her for something that sent her on a spiral? What were the actual concrete events that led to the misunderstanding in the first place? And if you can go back to the concrete events and the examples, it's easier to then work out where two people's interpretations have diverged. And I think for most people with existing trusting relationships, this is going to be able to be handled with a bit of a laugh and a bit of a, oh, well, no, that's definitely not what I meant. But if you've got colleagues where actually the relations were strained in the first place, or where they had a communication difficulty related to a disability or a mental health need, that's the point where you might need to, at that point, bring in a supervision session with somebody who's professional, because you don't want those things spiraling and creating real anxiety that overwhelms and results in a withdrawal from the workplace. Is that helpful?
Yep, thank you. Got a question from Debbie H. We've talked a lot about coping when you have lots of people around, lots of noise. She says, do the experts agree that those living alone are often the forgotten group? The isolation can be acute and is rarely acknowledged.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I really do. And that's kind of less of an issue around creating time boundaries, because people are available. But it's more of a kind of how much responsibility do you want to take as an employer for maintaining well-being there? So something that we're doing at Genius Within, for example, is we're having coffee mornings, and so there's a point in the day where you can just join in on a Zoom call, and it doesn't have to be about work. You can just have a chinwag about anything. And then the other thing we're doing is the Friday night quiz. So we're taking it in turns to write a quiz. Sometimes people turn up in fancy dress, so we're creating more social occasions for people to join in on, which creates a sense of camaraderie. And the other thing I found with some of the things I've been reading recently is that actually right now there are lots of people in that situation. So I have another colleague who started volunteering, and what she's doing is volunteering for our local community, and she's ringing other people who are on their own and isolated right now. So we've got quite a lot of older people in our community who are on their own, and she has made it her mission to spend 2 evenings a week ringing people to check in on them, which is also making her feel part of a community. So it's that whole kind of, you know, if what you want, you can reach out and give to others, and then that provides a feedback loop into you, and that's the thing you can suggest to employees, but you can also create events for employees depending on what kind of employees you have. You know, not everybody wants to do a fancy dress quiz. That might be particular to us.
Yeah. Got a question from Fernando Poriol. How do you deal with staff who don't participate at all, or are all too quiet, even if you're giving them space and lots of opportunities? Is this what we should be expecting in this situation?
For some people, yes. You know, I saw a very, very funny tweet from one of the accessibility team at Microsoft. He's someone who's very active on Twitter, Michael Vermeesh. He's a great person to follow. He's autistic, and very early on in this, he's always been a remote worker. As an autistic person, he enjoys the silence and the ability to focus and the ability to join in as and when he sees fit on his own terms. And he said, you know, my diary is absolutely full of extroverts wanting video calls, and I can't get on with any of my work. When will you all calm down and leave me alone? Which I thought was quite amusing. But obviously that's, so I think the thing is to not assume. You might find that the people who are withdrawn and isolating are doing so because that's just how they work best. Or you might need to be worried about them, and you might need to go and do a bit of reaching out and prodding to see what's going on. And that's where the check-in buddies can really come be helpful. You know, looking for things like, are they withdrawn from just social occasions, or are they also withdrawn in that they're not productive and they're not producing work and they're not responding to emails? You know, that's the point where you might want to be more worried about them. Choosing not to join into kind of forced social events is not something to tackle necessarily, but when the work starts to go as well, you might want to worry about that person's well-being and make more effort to check in on them. Yep,
thank you. Carl Burkett from Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service ask, what are the expectations from our employers when we're home working if we're also homeschooling? Are we expected to do our usual amount of working hours and the same working patterns?
Definitely not the same working patterns, and that's why I was kind of quite vague about the time and space boundaries. So, you know, what's working for some organisations is the beginning of the day and the end of the day, but being very, very aware that some people are actually having to fit their work into different hours. So, you know, I mean, I can't give advice on best practice there because it depends on your organisation, and different organisations have different needs. But in terms of if as an employer or as an employee, this process is something that brings you closer together, that increases loyalty and trust and engagement, then definitely you want to exert as much flexibility as possible. And you need to negotiate with your team. You know, would it be lovely if within a team we had one person who was actually a bit bored and lonely and on their own and wanted to work twice as much, and another person that was sort of overwhelmed with kids and needed to work less, and then they could just share the workload out between them and agree that that was a nice way of going about it. So, you know, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very tense. The issues that are going to arise from this are perceptions of justice and fairness. You know, how come I'm being paid the same amount of money to do less work or to do more work than my colleagues? It's not fair that I'm expected to do the same amount as my colleagues when this is my situation. So people are going to go into what's fair and what's not fair, and managers are going to have a very, very fine line to tread on balancing those needs. And with all things around fairness, transparency is the antidote, you know, so you can't go across people's confidentiality boundaries, but what you can do as an employer is talk about the process that you're using to allocate work and to decide what's fair and not fair. And you can say, look, you know, these are the draws, these are the difficulties, we're all doing our best right now, it's not ideal, there are going to be some imbalances for a while, but we have to look at the bigger picture, and just keep communicating about that. I think when things don't get spoken, they become unspeakable. And what we don't want is a load of back channel sniping about things that may or not be fair. So be very transparent about the process and give people the opportunity to talk about it in one-to-ones and ask them, go and get that information. Do you feel that what's happening right now is acceptable, sustainable, fair? Is there anything different that we could do to support you? Those are the kind of questions that you can ask to maybe draw some of that out.
Thank you, Nancy. Got a question from Colin Bonfield. He's just started a new role at the start of the lockdown. I mean, I've actually got friends in similar positions, and you know, some of they've had to come in and furlough people and trying to build new relationships across the organisation. Really, any advice for people in those situations?
As in doing the furloughing, people that are coming in.
I suppose more about how you build relationships with people when you've never met them and you're doing quite complicated, difficult things.
You know what? I actually think this is a wonderful opportunity to build those relationships. We might, you know, we can reframe this as this is an easier time to do it because people's boundaries are different. You know, we are being more honest about how we're feeling in the workplace. We are all in the same situation in terms of the ability that we have to leave the house. We're not in the same situation in terms of how easy that is for us. But what we've got is this commonality where we can talk about our situation and have a bit more informal disclosure than we might do normally. And what we could find is that brings us together.
I might be I'm looking maybe a bit far ahead for this stage in the webinar, but a couple of people asked questions actually around this. Jordan Miller is surprised. I'm surprised myself by enjoying remote working, and now I'm actually more nervous about returning to the working environment. We received another question from Liz Baker at the Environment Agency. She's enjoyed aspects of the lockdown, missed parts of working life, but in her voluntary work with the homelessness charities, she found it quite overwhelming being surrounded suddenly by people who are making lots of demands. It made me realise I'll need to adapt back. Is there anything people can do to sort of prepare themselves for returning to something like normality?
Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that needs to happen, and that's really important. So everybody needs a back to work plan. And people, those of us working in HR and leadership, we really need to start creating that back to work plan now, because it might take a little while. As I said right at the beginning, we've got the double peak. So as you go into a disaster situation, people get into an overwhelming state of anxiety, and then it kind of normalizes for a while, and we create a kind of holding pattern. And then as things return to normal, as we all breathe out a sigh of relief, all of the kind of hugeness and enormity of the past hits us in one go, and we become very anxious. And if you align that with suddenly becoming surrounded by people and noise at the same time, we are likely to have some fairly serious mental health issues going on. So we do need a plan, and it will have to be, bespoke to each organisation and what's reasonable and what's practicable. But one of the things I'm really hopeful of in this period is that we've all learned how viable remote working can be for many people. And I've got a hunch that we're not going to go back to normality. So for starters, it's not going to happen. We're not flicking a switch here. We're not going to be just flicking the lockdown off and that'll be that for the next, forever. It's going to be sort of bumpy for a few months, possibly years. And so we've got to have an easing in gently. But when we finish that process, let's really look at what we actually need in terms of face-to-face contact. We could be so much more accessible to a wide range of people if we just had more flexibility in terms of when we work. In mid-April, I was looking at an article in The Economist looking at the Chinese economy and how it was rebounding from lockdown in the Wuhan area. And they were back up to 80% manufacturing capacity by the middle of April, but commercial letting and sales was only at 50%. And I think that's quite telling. We're going to change our working conditions. We're going to be less dependent on commuting, less dependent on going to the office. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's potentially an opportunity for lots of people with caring responsibilities who tend to be women, and so therefore from gender equality in the workplace, and also for people with disabilities who find it harder to commute, people with disabilities who require a certain set of quite intense technology to support their work. These things can be more readily accepted now because we've all had to have an experience of them, and I think that's a benefit. So when we plan to go back, let's plan to be more flexible. Let's plan to be gentler on each other. Let's plan to have this kind of remote option for people that need it.
Thank you very much indeed, Nancy. We will come back to you shortly, but we want to have a look at some of the issues around workplace, equipment, and kind of working methods. So we're going to hear briefly from NASA again, and then we'll go to Carl, the head of assistive technology training for Microlink.
Thank you, Nancy. That was brilliant, as usual. Nancy very rightly focused on the mental health aspect of your workforce, and that's extremely important right now because of the circumstances. However, I think the other important part is the physical well-being and physical comfort and safety. We, as a company, we actually were a bit ahead of the rest in terms of sending people home to work from home. About a few days before the lockdown, I felt that was inevitable. So any key staff were given their laptop. Very soon I discovered just having the tools is not enough. They need to create a safe environment so they can actually do the work and do it without hurting themselves. And quite frankly, the way we treat our body is not how it's supposed to be. And very soon we'll discover we'll have a long-lasting damage if you're not careful. So what we have got, the two interventions about comfort and safety plus the productivity. So that gives you the wholesome person who can actually contribute to the work that they've been paid to do. A lot of people are grateful for the job. I've got a few people who are very upset for being furloughed. They want to work, but obviously the nature of the work, we could only bring some of them for now, and then we keep rotating them. But every one of them require that physical environment in which they can actually do their job without feeling discomfort, feeling stressed, and obviously physical stress, I'm sure Nancy will agree, also leads to mental stress and vice versa. So what we need to do is to minimize that by not allowing people to kind of treat work like they do in their leisure. Work is very intensive. It requires a lot of focus. And by that nature, your whole body becomes tense throughout the work you're doing. Even for half an hour of meeting, actually you start feeling the tension in your body. So in order to do that, you really have to create that comfortable environment. So Carl will actually go through this with you and show you what we need to actually take care of in terms of well-being and safety and comfort, and also what productivity tools you require to give your people to actually overcome the current situation, which is quite unusual and unprecedented. So over to you, Carl. Thank you.
Thank you, Nessa. Yes, so as Nessa has said, obviously being comfortable at home is a massively important thing. So I'm going to talk about some of the physical impacts and also things we can do to help, and also some technical kind of technology-based things as well that we can help to make you feel more comfortable in the home. As an assessor, I see many different forms of bad posture, which tends to be one of the main kind of problems of discomfort. Even in the workplace where people are given the right equipment to work with, I'm still seeing that happening. It's even more so with somebody who's working from home because they generally haven't got the right equipment and they're generally a laptop user as well. Bad posture leads to fatigue, potential injury, and a lack of productivity. So it's really important that we educate people and help them to understand about sitting. It's such an incredibly important thing. Here on the screen, I've given you a few kind of examples of the way that people often sit badly. So for the first thing here on the top left, we've got the slouch, somebody leaning forwards towards their laptop usually, towards the screen and towards the keyboard so they can get closer to it. Their feet off the floor as well. Your head is about the weight of a bowling ball. So if you imagine holding a bowling ball out in front of you, you know that there's quite a lot of muscles that are under tension to allow you to do that. So leaning forward, your whole center of gravity is in the wrong position. So all of those muscles are working constantly to help you to keep your position like that. Your legs as well, not touching the ground, you're going to be taking away a lot of the circulation from your upper legs. The recline, so actually reclining back in your chair in this way, stretching your legs out. It looks like it's probably going to be comfortable, but again, our center of gravity is in the wrong position. It's not helping at all, and also our arms are outstretched in front of us for long periods, which again is not going to be at all healthy for us for neck and back and shoulders. Lastly, the horizontal. Now, as a home worker, yes, your sofa is a lovely, comfortable place to be to watch the television. It's not a wonderful, comfortable place really to sit and do your work and use your laptop. You can make it comfortable for a little while. On these pictures here, we've got someone lying down with a cushion at their back. That does help, but you're completely bending your body in a way that really it's not very comfortable to sit in for very long periods of time, damaging to the neck and the upper back often. So the next slide, please. So just home workers really should just be encouraged to follow a few simple rules to create a healthy working environment for themselves if they can. If they're able to, we'd always recommend that they actually you give them their own display screen environment self-assessment to do as well, so they can actually go through some of these points and look at how they're sitting and look at the way that they are, to make sure that they're actually paying attention to it. Often people are just completely unaware of where their bodies are whilst they're sitting, so doing their own self-assessment is a good thing. Work at a desk or a table if you can, and I know that sometimes that's not going to be the case for some people that can do that, but somewhere where you can get your legs underneath the table is important. Working at a kitchen counter is often a really bad thing. You can't get your legs under, so people tend to twist, and again that's twisting the whole back and causing them problems there. If you're able to get your legs under, you can move yourself closer to your laptop, which is what we want. Use a separate keyboard as well if you're using a laptop. Moving the laptop away from you, bringing that keyboard closer to you so that you're able to actually get your arms into a really good position is going to be helpful. And a mouse as well. Trackpads on laptops, notoriously bad. If I use one for 5 minutes, my hand, I feel it hurting straight away. It's a very stressful thing to use a trackpad. So using a proper mouse is really, really helpful, or a rollerball mouse or an ergonomic kind of mouse in that way can be helpful as well. Raising the laptop up to a position where the top of the laptop is actually at eye level is important too. We tend to slouch over our laptops. We move towards them. We're kind of doing this kind of thing. Not helpful at all. Bring that laptop screen up to eye level so that you're just looking down slightly, sort of between 0 and 40 degrees down. Your eyes can naturally do that without too much trouble. If you're moving your neck, then that's causing a problem. If you have your screen too high, your eyes generally don't. If you try looking at the ceiling, it's very difficult to look at the ceiling. So it's got to be at that eye level to make it work in that way. A laptop riser, a laptop stand is all that you need there. If you don't have one of those, telephone directories, if they still exist where you are great things. Box files, reams of paper, something just to bring that laptop up to the right height. If you have an external monitor, great, use it. That's really, really good. Don't fall into the trap, though, of using that external monitor with the laptop screen below it, as I see many people doing. Again, you're still giving yourself that same problem where the laptop screen is much below you. The larger screen, much too high. So turn off the laptop screen and just use the bigger screen. It's there for a reason, and it will work for you in a much better way. Lastly, your chair. And again, if you've got a chair that's height adjustable, brilliant. That really does help. If you don't, and you're sitting on one of your dining room chairs or something like that, look at the height of it. If you've got your arms up at an unusual angle, put a cushion underneath yourself. Raise yourself in that way. If you find that your feet are dangling from the floor at that point, put something under your feet as well to support them. That can be very useful. And simple things like maybe just rolling up a towel or something in that nature behind you in the small of your back for a little bit of lumbar support can help on a straight back chair as well, to give you that bit of extra support too. Sit stand is good. You see someone there using a sit stand kind of environment. If you're able to work at the kitchen counter, brilliant. If it's at the right height for you in that way, then yes, you can work at the kitchen counter standing, and alternating your position between the sitting and the standing is incredibly healthy and really does promote very good posture if you're able to do that. The next slide, please. So equipping your staff with the right tool significantly lowers the risk of injury and fosters well-being and productivity. We at Microlink, we commonly supply a home workers kit for many home workers that actually incorporates many of these sorts of devices. Laptop stand, as we discussed, mouse pads, wrist rests, keyboards, screens. Even you see there are an inflatable lumbar support that you can use, so you can use that instead of using that towel scrunched up. These have all been proven to really help a home worker get themselves into a much better posture by using fairly minimal tools with what they have. An active noise cancelling headset as well is something we often provide. Nancy mentioned this before about trying to shut yourself off from the environment around you as well. Often we provide things like that too, that actually do stop a lot of the noise and distraction around you too. The next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to the technologies. As Microlink, we provide many assistive technology solutions to people with disabilities, but actually there's a lot of the technologies we provide that are absolutely fantastic productivity tools for everybody. Getting your text into the computer, the whole thing of typing. Some people don't find typing to be a particularly easy thing. I still use these two things most of the time for typing. I'm not very good at all. So speech recognition really is an excellent technology nowadays to use. It didn't used to be that great in the old days. Yeah, absolutely. You may well have tried it, and it may well not have worked very well for you at all. I'm sure that most people have come across it in some form or other nowadays with things like Alexa or Siri. That might be a bad thing, I suppose, of shouting at it, but still, the technologies now for actually getting text into the computer are very, very well developed and very, very good. Technologies, for example, such as Dragon Naturally Speaking, is a commercial product that you can use, very developed, allows you to work with multiple vocabularies, multiple languages. We can create scripts, do all sorts of things to actually allow you complete hands-free control of your computer as well if you want. But even your inbuilt operating systems now have become very developed and well worth considering. So Microsoft have the speech recognition system within their Windows 10 now, which is very, very, very good as basic dictation. And Apple as well now have introduced the voice control system, which is very adaptable and works very, very well too. Next slide, please. Going in the other direction, actually getting your computer to talk to you. Again, text-to-speech tools, we often use them for people with disabilities or maybe neurodiverse conditions where they have a difficulty in reading, and being able to hear the information is very, very helpful for them. But again, useful for everybody. Reading from a computer screen, particularly from a laptop when you haven't got much screen area to work with, is not very good. It's very fatiguing for most people, particularly when you're reading long, multiple page documents. It's just not a great reading environment, really. So by using a text-to-speech system, we can sit back in our chairs, get it to start reading that document. We're hearing it, and many of the technologies allow you to have the text highlighted on the screen as well. So we're hearing it and seeing it. So a multi-sensory kind of experience. So for many people, they find that a much more absorbing way of being able to read information. So that's well worth considering, and it means that you're not having to crane to see the screen of your computer. Few things here, some commercial products, Claro Read, Text Help Read and Write, fantastic text-to-speech tools, but they've got a whole wealth of other tools in there to help with reading and literacy. But Microsoft have an amazing system which is free now that you can download called the Immersive Reader, which gives you text-to-speech systems, highlighting of text, dictionary functions, lots of really, really useful things that you can use to help you to digest the vast amounts of text that a home worker may well have to from a laptop screen. The next slide, please. Lastly, mind mapping. Now this is a wonderful tool. We can use this in a collaborative way as well if we're in the workplace, which I think is a great way of doing things. If you're not familiar with mind mapping, you may well have seen something like you see here on the left-hand side of the screen, where we've got a hand-drawn kind of mind map diagram. I think children are taught this within school. Other people like using it in any case. It's a really visual and engaging way of working. We've got a topic. We've then expanded that topic out with some branches with main topics around it, which we then expanded further as the thoughts come to us. And we can work in this in a really kind of non-linear fashion, something I find really, really useful myself to work in this way. So I don't need to think about the start, middle, and end of what I'm doing. I can just think about things as they come to me and put them onto the map as they go. It's great. It really is visual, and it helps us to look at something in this way. Very, very engaging. But traditionally, it's not really a transferable kind of way of working into the workplace. So we wouldn't really encourage people to use this as a day-to-day thing itself. You can't present a mind map in this way to the board of directors for a new project that you're working on. So we need to work in a different way. There is software now, lots of software systems. You'll see here on the right-hand side of my screen, I've got a picture of a mind map that's been created within the computer. There's a particular application called MindView. There are others, Mind Manager, AOA, that allow us to do this within the computer. We can put our ideas very quickly and easily into the computer, onto the computer screen, organize them in that visual way. Fantastic. But, and this is the power of it, that we can then take that information and turn it into that linear fashion. So you see there on the right-hand screen of those two, we've got a Word document, which is our standard start, middle, and end document with a title and chapters and all the things that you would do with a standard document or report. It's created that for you just from that visual document. I'm going to hand over to Nasa now, because Nasa's going to talk about a couple of other products and solutions that we have that you might find useful. Thank you, Nasa.
Thank you, Carl. That's very insightful. And this one is a bit more clever technology, and clever in the sense that they've recently come out to help people to do things really more productively, as well as helping disabled people. Right now, everyone is suffering from information overload. You have tons of information coming to you that you could have in a matter of 5-minute conversation by the water cooler or having a cup of tea together. Now it's coming to you in a form of a big document and an email. You have to read it all. Taking information is not very easy. So what you do is, as Nancy quite rightly says, Pomodoro technique means you have to also find time to relax. You can't sit behind your screen for hours and hours. But relaxation also could mean that you could still engage in the work without having to be sat behind the desk. So, for example, this Allcam My Reader, which is recently developed for blind people, it captures the information on a printed copy converts it into audio and you listen to it. That's extremely useful for a blind person who wants to read menus or read books or magazines. They've created a new version of that, which is essentially a laser marker. You point it towards a page, it scoops the entire content of that page, reads it back to you instantly, like a real-time scanner. Now, of course, you can use that one for reading what's on your screen, or you can do it on what's on an email or a printed copy or even a book. That's quite useful for that. The second part involves brain science. Now, I'm not the expert in brain science. Someone told me, don't talk about things you're not good at. So I'll leave that to the scientists. But I know one thing for sure, brain is rewirable. If you practice in particular ways, and they tell you that if you work in a particular way, after a while, the brain adapts to that. So that's the nature of your brain. So super reading was actually developed by someone in Silicon Valley to help very busy professionals to be able to read much faster. Now, not only just read much faster, also comprehension also has to be high. So the technique they've developed actually allows you to read up to five words a go, rather than single word at a time. If you do this for a month, around 20 minutes a day, it shows that you can speed up your reading by a factor of 5. I mean, it's 3 to 5 times faster than your normal speed. It's really worth trying at a time where you've got so much to read through, and the time investment would be really good. And it's these are the online tools. We've been dabbling with a lot of technology. Next slide, please. Now, the second part of this, what we know about the future, there's going to be a wave of people with mental health. Now, I don't know about, again, too much of the internal clever science of these things, but wherever technology has become part of our lives, people wear things to help them to become more disciplined in what they do, whether it's to do with jogging or to do with weight watching. Or now, there are tools now in the market that what they call neurofeedback. One is actually approved by the NHS that people can actually use when they've got depression. Does it work? Doesn't it work? I think that the user will decide whether it's good or not. It's not up to myself or the science to say, well, actually, there's no foundation for it. If a person thinks a device is going to help them, it's useful. So this particular one that we've actually used, and I will tell you with a caveat, I trialed for a group of my staff to actually see whether this technology works. All it does is allows people to do those exercises, the mindfulness, the breathing. And over a time, the data, it shows them how they're improving and then matches it to the individual's feedback. Is this going to be the panacea for mental health? No, of course not. Nothing is. There's no silver bullet for any problem we have in society. What it does do, when the time comes that a lot of people need a lot of interventions, we need a lot of options for them. And people need to actually go and find those help, because we do know mental health is the biggest, right now, is the biggest cause of unemployment throughout the world. Whether it's you become unemployed and have a mental health, or you have a mental health become unemployed, the facts are the highest number of people out of work have a mental health. So I think if the numbers increase, we're going to have to find solutions. I'm not sure if we've got enough professionals, medical people to do that. So I think, again, wearable technology could offer a way forward. And as I said, this one has been very good for some people. They found it extremely useful, and some just found it not for me. Great. Well, that's the way of technology. Next slide, please. Here is basically myself, and Nancy will just do a quick sum up. Nancy, please, over to you.
Hi there. Sorry, I've been busy answering people's questions in the Q&A and I lost my unmute button. So I think, and actually this kind of builds on some of the questions I've been being asked, how do we take some of this forward? And I saw a wonderful meme on Twitter the other day, and it said basically when we go out, but it's one of those quadrant models, in in the view of I think it's George Box who said all models are wrong, but some of them are helpful. And this is a helpful model where when we're thinking about how we reintegrate, we've got 4 categories. One is new things that we're going to keep. One is new things that we don't need anymore. And one is old things that we've ditched, that we're going to keep ditched. And one is old things that we're going to reinstate. And some of these things around managing project work remotely, looking at the way teams perform and the way we measure performance based on output rather than input, and kind of thinking about some of the remote communication and how helpful it's going to be. Those can go into the new things we're going to keep box, you know, and let's pop them in and let's have that conversation as we come back. Let's find out, you know, it's very easy to just, you know, rock up a quick survey monkey, you know, what's worked well for you over the last few weeks, what hasn't worked well from you. You know, let's put in place some of those structures. So because I've got a blended team, I've got a small head office, and then actually most of my staff are split out across multiple locations. Those that were mainly remote have all said that they've enjoyed this period and they feel more connected to the company than ever before. And I think part of our core structure now is going to be you know, keeping regular dial-ins, we've been having a start the week meeting as managers, and all our remote managers are just loving it. And we did our monthly meeting with everybody dialing in, whereas normally it's most of us there in person and a few people dialing in, and then it creates that separation. So it's really just kind of going, right, what are we going to keep? What's worked really well that we're going to keep and do more of? What hasn't worked so well that we're really glad to give up? And what did we used to do that we actually now realise is a complete waste of time, and it's been actually making life harder for us, not better? That's Bash, shall I go back over to you, Nessa, for a sum up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. Actually, we may have skipped the Q&A session. My apologies. I jumped that. We'll come back to that after finishing remarks. No, I as an employer, I have several people out there, some on furlough and some on remote working. And establishing informal channels within the company, they can have their own social network. Using Microsoft Teams has been great. So you could have your own little private network conversation, you know, and indeed, if you are new to the company, this is a great time to get involved, because we have a, you know, everyday chat facility, and people contribute what they've done. A lot of our people who are on furlough, they're actually helping volunteering for NHS. They come back with their experience. They go out shopping for elderly. They do. So it's actually built a real sense of, you know, family. And I think that's really been helpful. There are people who really can't, they don't want to stay at home for, again, they need psychological help. We reach out to them. They come back to us, and, you know, we have that conversation. So I think it's not about all just work and what you produce. It's actually, are you well enough to produce it for us? And quite frankly, as a company, we've never struggled with having disabled people working for us. More than half the workforce are disabled. The most motivated are the disabled people. And right now, I think they're the ones who are more resilient, if you ask me, because they used to work flexibly and be able to do their job. And there are lots of people I know in organizations that we've helped. If they had the flexibility, they've actually been overproductive. So I think right now, what I would say is, look after your workforce. Just make sure they know you're there. They don't need much help other than they know somebody cares. Giving them the task to do. Also understand that the tasks don't need to be done in the same way as the old days. Try to be flexible. And some of that actually will help you overcome some of the tensions and some of the conflicts. I do actually have finger on the pulse for a lot of my staff, because, you know, I do kind of reach out to them once in a while, even out of the blue, just say, you okay? Is there anything we can do for you? So I think this is really is a good time to bring that compassion to the business. And I think this lockdown has really brought the best in people, and let's harness that. Next slide, please. Matt, if you feel we should do the questions now, we can.
Yeah, we can do it. We come back to this briefly at the end. Yes. Well, thank you all for that. Yeah, we've got a good set of questions still coming in. So I'm still watching the questions, the Q&A. If you have any further questions, do send them in now if it's something was prompted from that last 20 minutes or so. One question I have is from Dr. Fabri, who is a financial manager in a municipality in Rimini, Italy. I've seen lots of monies being granted for training about smart working, but nothing provided from institutions about buying new hardware, such as laptop PC, which is fundamental to implement smart working at home. I mean, where staff are encountering problems in securing suitable equipment from their employers, are there routes or arguments or ways people can get leverage to get what they need?
Actually, that is really one of the mysteries to me about business leaders. You know, it's false economy. You know, I had a brilliant public sector worker who was allowed to go home and signed off on a sick leave because she didn't have the equipment to work. And the equipment didn't cost a lot, but the salary that she gets does. And it's a public sector. And right now, all the pressure's on them. I think they do actually need to insist on getting equipment, because my worry about this lockdown, one of the darker side of my brain tells me, if they're disabled people or people who are vulnerable don't get the opportunity to prove themselves, they'll never get that opportunity again in the future. Because when it comes to deciding who was brilliant, who was performing, who wasn't, then those people will actually be left behind. So you know, if you really want people to do the work, you've got to give them the right equipment, the right tools. And if you don't, then quite frankly, those people will be the ones who'll be worse off. It'd be a shame if they're not. Some of our, we know that a lot of the clients or companies send staff home. You know, it was almost an overnight decision. Very quickly, they realized actually it's not working for them. So they now started sending equipment to them. You know, it's an afterthought, but better late than never. So I believe that you should go back to your employers and actually insist on getting the right equipment.
Mm-hmm. There's another question I have from Ruth Asher in Detroit, Michigan, who has had lower back and neck issues, has been through various physical therapy sessions, and now working from home, these are being exacerbated again. Is there anything that people in that position can do to either secure further support or find ways around physical problems?
Before Carl jumps into this, I think his area of expertise, but I would actually highlight one thing. I had a similar situation with someone who had multiple operations because of those conditions. And she was about to have another one. And until we sent one of our ergonomist experts to go in and see what's going on, we discovered she had all the equipment, it wasn't set up correctly. Within a few minutes, she said she felt so much better. She started now being more active. So it's sometimes you've got to have the right equipment, and Carl will tell you what you need, but you've got to make sure you do follow the correct principles of that, and you've got to make sure they're set up correctly. Over to you, Carl.
Absolutely, and that's exactly right, and I see that as well. Even obviously, some of the guidance that I've given today, really, of being mindful about your body, I think is important, and that thing about posture. And I even see people with all the right equipment still working with a bad posture. So it's about actually being mindful, thinking about how you're sitting, looking at yourself. Yes, it's if you've got a fantastic ergonomic chair and some of those sorts of things, it can be massively helpful, but it's still about sitting, and you can still get yourself into a reasonably good ergonomic position even using a kitchen chair to some extent. So no, be mindful, I suppose, is about your body is the best advice.
One thing I will add, and it's a message to the maybe the employers rather than the employees. Musculoskeletal condition is the biggest cause of absenteeism. We've demonstrated that in our big case study, that if you get the right equipment, and they don't cost much, it costs several $100s at best, you can reduce the absenteeism by 80%. And we have that longitudinal study done over thousands of people, that within a year after the intervention, the absenteeism dropped by around 80%. So again, employers should invest to make sure the work environment is both at home and at work is safe and does not cause fatigue and safety issues.
Thank you. I mean, this is actually another related question from Rich Jones. How can risk assessments related to reasonable adjustments be conducted without face-to-face contact?
Well, that's Carl.
I think there certainly will be barriers with certain conditions, but we can, and certainly the whole thing here where we're working with the video environment. I've been doing some assessments where I've been working with someone and over a system like this and being able to actually see them. For me, certainly if it's ergonomic factors, then I really do need to see the individual. And I've been able to do that actually using the video conferencing system. So I think we can do that. And environment is important for me as an assessor, for me to understand that. But for many conditions, I can do quite a lot. Certainly for complex disabilities and physical problems, then I really do want to be there face to face. I don't think there's any substitute for that. But for many ergonomic issues, I think we can do this with video. I wouldn't just do that over a telephone. That wouldn't work. I do need to have some visual context.
Thank you. I've got some wider questions now. There's a couple of questions on a related point. Nina Pinwell says, Nancy's insights are really helpful. How do I balance my duty of care for staff, needing to see them to check they're okay, with not insisting on cameras being used? And Rafael Scary, as a manager, I also need to control and manage my team. Targets still need to be reached, results are expected. While psychological impact should be managed, we need to have other processes in place to monitor output and results. Any ideas how we can strike a balance between control and understanding our staff?
Well, is that not just the question of managers all over the place at any time? I mean, I think, you know, that's always where we're at in management of staff. We need to balance control and getting results. But I would, yeah, and in relation to the first question, I think those two kind of go together. And what I would advise people to do is to be curious rather than contemptuous. And so when you're not seeing the results that you want to see, and when you're not getting the contact that you need to feel reassured that that person is okay, approach them with a mindset of curiosity to kind of explore what might be happening cognitively in terms of their ability to concentrate and plan, emotionally in terms of any anxiety or stress that is extra to normal, and then very practically in terms of the tools they've got available to them to use and whether or not they need something else. So if you approach all of those things kind of curiously, you know, is what's going on for you right now? I think having the right kind of mindset when you go into those conversations will get you the results that you want. Yeah, the intrusiveness of a video call, it's difficult to insist on, but there are other things that you'll notice if that person isn't okay. You know, they might not want to do a video call with you, but if they're not okay, then it won't just be their lack of facial expression that you're missing. It will be a quality of their work, a tone in their email, the absence of niceties and kind of camaraderie. And so, you know, you'll see those things withdrawing as well as their face. So I think from a safeguarding perspective, we can look for other flags as well as requiring people to see us. I mean, and then it depends what kind of safeguarding rules you would put in place normally, you know. So if you had so forget all this lockdown stuff for a minute, you know, just under any circumstance, at what point do you intervene as a manager? At what point does it become your responsibility? And at what, you know, how helpful can you be? You don't want to cross any boundaries, and people have a right to privacy. We don't want to mistake employers for having a kind of familial responsibility. It's nice when we have that trust and collaboration with our staff, but it isn't necessary. And there's a fine balance between being kind of invasive and controlling versus supportive and collaborative.
Thank you. We have question coming from Tessa. Oh, she's disappeared, unfortunately. Where's she gone? Nasser, that one has disappeared off my screen, but you said you were going to answer this. It was about any suitable time management software
Yeah,
that might be
disappears my
useful.
screen. Yeah, there are quite few actually. There are some free to use and there are some commercial ones. What I will do is put that in the answer when we go back to them, because we need to give them links as well.
Right. Okay.
In fact, a lot of these technologies really came from the university students. You know, with neurodiversity and they struggle. So there are lots of programs designed just for them, and that's what we use. Also, they come to business board. I'm sorry, I lost that. I was just about to type that, and I lost the screen for some reason.
Yes, it disappeared. I'll take a note of her name and we'll get back to her.
Thank you.
Individually. Got another couple of wider questions. Well, one, Lisa Randall asks, do you see any differences in the way between the way that public and private sector organisations are handling these issues?
My personal experience, private sector are leading on this at the moment, which is a shame, because public sector care of duty is much more robust, and it's a bit more like, I would say, should be a bit more proactive, but it is not to the level the private sector are doing, and especially private sector multinationals are trying to do this globally because they really see the benefit in terms of business, the commercial benefit. For every pound or every dollar they spend, they can get $5 back. And that's actually proven. It's not like a number. So I think that is where I think the public sector should do more. I understand there are complexities, but I believe that there is room for improvement.
Don't know if anybody else has seen any differences.
I'm just seeing differences generally between good, competent leadership and not competent leadership. And I don't think that whether you're private sector or public sector, that's defining any of that. You know, I'm seeing good examples in both sectors, bad examples in both sectors, and the resounding commonality in good leadership at this moment is communication. The more communication, the better. Even if people choose not to engage in it, the fact that it's there is making the difference. And one of the things that I'm really picking up on, and I wrote one of my Forbes blogs about it, is the way good leaders right now are communicating process in the absence of certainty. So if we don't have answers, we still communicate process, and that I think is a big takeaway. So if everyone wants to just write that down, please write that down. In the absence of certainty, you can still communicate process, and that is reassuring for people who are looking for some sort of leadership or management or competence. You know, and it. You know, you saw a good example of it that I put in my Forbes blog was General McMaster, the American Army Corps of Engineers, who was going into New York several weeks ago when everybody was kind of really freaking out about what was happening. And he said, look, we don't know how many people are going to need this care, but this is what we're going to do. We don't know all of this, but we're going in, we're doing this to the Javits Center. We've got these people coming in, da, 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 da. And he went through a list of everything that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to do to support New York. What he couldn't say was, you know, this is when we'll have a vaccine. This is how many ventilators we're going to have. This is how many people are going to need care. He just talked about what they were able to do and what they were going to do and when they were going to do it. And it was beautiful. And everybody found it really reassuring. So I think that's the kind of thing that we can look to right now, and it doesn't have to be public sector or private sector.
I believe the current situation will be a game changer. We all went into this unequal. We ended up in this situation all equal. Everybody's affected the same way. We all working flexibly. We all have the equipment we need, you know, more or less. So when we come out of this, if the employers, the planners really know how to harness the maximum out of the workforce, they will do the same. They will actually give the flexibility to people. They give them the right tools, and they've given access to the platforms that previously they weren't able to achieve. This video conferencing, most companies used to ban it. It was impossible to have one. Now everyone has it. So I think we will move into a better, hopefully more inclusive world. And a more inclusive world is also very productive and more financially better for organizations, whether if you're a private sector or a public sector, you get more for your bucks. That's the bottom line.
Can I just jump in there? Because I actually don't think we're all having the same experience at all. I think those of us with more than one bedroom in our house with good broadband capacity and several different devices in which to access the internet are having a very, very different experience to people living in tower blocks, people who don't have access to the internet at home. There are a lot of families right now trying to homeschool their kids when the only internet access in the household is a smartphone with a pay-as-you-go connection. And what I hope is that the severity of the inequality between those that do have good internet capacity and those that don't has been drawn out as being a kind of really important basic human right that we need to level across the field from a policy perspective right now. Certainly the educators I know have become incredibly aware of which children can access the curriculum and which children are absolutely not able. I mean, my company works with people who are long-term unemployed and in prison, as well as people who are in the work environment. And one of my staff had one of her clients crying on the phone because she'd been asked she'd got an email on her phone from the teacher with all of these things that the child was supposed to do, and all of them involved downloading and printing out resources. She doesn't have a computer, she doesn't have a printer, she couldn't do any learning with her child, and my member of staff was asking me if we could use our stationery budget to print out her child's homework for her, because it's not really part of our contract, but this woman was so distressed by that. So I think it's really worth knowing, particularly for those who work in public policy right now, that actually there is a massive gap between the haves and the have-nots in terms of accessibility to participation in education and work, and that is via broadband, the internet and laptops, and that's something we need to address in public policy going forward quite urgently.
The
Absolutely
former
agree.
Cabinet Secretary, Lord O'Donnell, made these points to me on Monday. We published that story yesterday because he wanted to emphasise that whilst the lockdown is great for achieving narrow clinical outcomes, the harm it's causing, including to inequality, is enormous. And he was urging government to take a wider view of its pros and cons.
And he famously did say GDP shouldn't be measured from the economic output, should be on the well-being of the citizens. And that's quite frankly, right now, this is more important than ever. A lot of uncertainty. But what I think it's about just a conclusion. I think we can make this world better, more inclusive. We have hundreds of thousands of people on the spectrum, autism. There could be brilliant cyber security people, but they don't have access to employment, because the flexibility of working from home wasn't there, or the access to the tools. I think we could actually find a new talent pool, which we've never really used. I believe that because the whole world was turned upside down, yes, we discovered some of the flaws, and Nancy highlighted one of them: inequality in access to education for everyone. Universities were supposed to do things accessibly by law, they haven't, and now they're losing a lot of their students. And mental health is certainly going to be a major feature of our lives. Apart from global warming, mental health is going to be up there, plus cybersecurity threats. Potentially, if there's a silver lining, apart from the old people who need to be locked in for a bit longer than the rest, we need to actually, they need help. They need to have continuous help. But we really need to actually use the current learning to make sure that the future world is designed, which is more inclusive for everyone.
Thank you. Nancy, do you want to do 1 minute?
Well, just 100% concur with that. The number of clients that I've had who've asked for remote flexible working as a disability accommodation and have been told no, because it's not reasonable, or it's not possible. Well, we've just had an entire worldwide experiment that shows that it is possible, and you can do it. And so I'm hoping that we stick to this, that we create more blended working environments, more blended learning, that reduces the travel burden, which is kind of crippling our environment. And I think that that the social change that we could get out of this could create a more inclusive environment, and that would be a silver lining and a win.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time. So thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers, Dr. Nancy Doyle, Dr. Nessa Siabi, Carl Ward. Thank you to Microlink, and thank you very much indeed to the audience for joining us. We really hope you found it useful. Thank you very much indeed for all the questions you've put through. If we didn't get around to answering your question, we will try to answer that in writing individually afterwards. And yes, we will be sending you all a link to the presentation, a recording of this full session, and the write-up which we'll publish on Global Government Forum. That will come to you within a week or so. Meanwhile, thank you to all of our audience actually for all the work you're doing to support the public and deliver public services in this very strange and difficult period. Thank you all.
Is it